The warning
Berto?
signs nobody saw. David. I know we're a little bit worn out of the David situation, but the truth is this situation is just so diabolically crazy. I almost feel as if this case is like the modern day version of the O.J. Simpson situation, but arguably way worse. And this video really caught my attention. Shout out to JR Wisdom. He's the one that brought us this video today. And I think he has a very interesting take on this whole David and Celeste situation, even diving deeper into David's upbringing that I really don't think I've seen anywhere else on the internet. So let's get right into the video and see what it's talking about. Love y'all, appreciate y'all. Where you at, family?
A murder that has become one of the most discussed crime cases of recent times is that of David Anthony Burke, who went by the stage name David. David was at the peak of his career. He dropped a high-charting debut album, he had millions of social media followers, and was significantly wealthy for a man only 20 years old. However, in September of 2025, detectives discovered the body of a 14-year-old girl that had been missing for months, Celeste Rivas Hernandez, in the trunk of his Tesla, decomposed, dismembered, and abandoned. And for months, people debated on whether they believed that this innocent-looking, clean-shaven young man with a melodic voice could do the things he'd been accused of. But now that David has been arrested for murder, and the prosecution have documented their evidence, the likelihood that this was some sort of setup has been significantly reduced. It became evidenced that David had a physical relationship with Celeste while she was still a child. And when they broke up and she allegedly threatened to expose the relationship to ruin his career, the prosecution believed he took matters into his own hands to protect what he'd built. But when you add the context that he made music constantly that included themes of blood, violence, and a romance that ends in tragedy, it's caused a lot of people to suspect that this outcome was something David always wanted. However, I'm not here to discuss theory and conspiracy. I'm here to clinically answer two main overarching questions. How did David's life engineer him to become someone capable of potentially murdering and dismembering a child? And if he did, then what mental mechanisms allowed him to carry on with life after the fact, knowing the body of the girl he was once intimate with was decomposing in his...
This is a really big question, man, because doing it a crime is one thing, but then to act like nothing happened the way he was, just showing up to shows, you know what I'm saying, doing interviews, just almost seeming like everything was perfectly fine. It just shows how demented and schizophrenic, not schizophrenic, but psychopathic this guy was.
It's easy to just label him as pure evil and move on, but as a student of psychology, I find it crucial that we understand what happened to him in childhood, what were the warning signs, and figure out the why that surely exists in this story.
And let me add on to why that's so important is because when you can see the signs, a lot of times when you can prevent something, that is the biggest deterrent of it all. You know what I'm saying? So prevention and making sure that we can actually look at something and be like, oh, something's off about this. We probably should take the steps to prevent something like this from happening. That's always going to be the biggest change that we can make rather than waiting till after the fact.
There's a lot of questions I've seen online that I think I have the ability to answer by the end of this video. Answers that will give you a genuine understanding into the mind and psychology of David Anthony Burke.
I played it for her in the car. She was like, David, this song is too violent. You talking about killing people in your music? No, not my son. I was like, wait, I might be onto something.
Holy shit. That's chilling. Disclaimer, YouTube, understand something, man. Pretty much YouTube don't cook us, man. We just analyzing and we aren't saying facts and we aren't promoting violence. All right, enough. Let's get into it.
Let's start from the beginning. So, you're a New Yorker.
New Yorker, Queens, New York.
What are your parents like? Are they musicians?
Not at all. My dad is a litigator for a law firm. My mother was a teacher.
Okay.
She doesn't do it anymore, but she does notary now.
David Anthony Burke was born in Queens, New York, to Colleen and Dawood Burke, two Christian parents that seemingly would give him a tough and controlled upbringing.
Everything we played in the house, music-wise, was just Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, gospel music, like classical stuff, instrumentals only. Like we didn't listen to any other music. There was no like Lady Gaga and all the popular artists everybody was listening to. We never could listen to that because my parents just wouldn't let us. It was just like straight classical stuff.
It was literally nothing. It was all gospel and like classical, Mozart, Bach, like all that type of stuff. Because my parents wanted me to be really smart. They never like talked about college or anything like that, but they always wanted me to be very intellectual, very put together, have an idea what I'm doing, but they never like listened to music like that at all.
Trying to control what your kids listen to and the content they consume isn't necessarily harmful in and of itself, but if a kid is going to school and has no level of cultural relatability, it can cause feelings of being excluded, which in turn affects his socialization. If everyone got to access music and it became a point of discussion he couldn't involve himself in, it might have led to feelings of envy. And instead of David accepting this, he tried to find a way around it.
Did your parents put sort of a cap on what you could and couldn't listen to in the
Nah,
house?
I was sneaking
It
around.
wasn't like that.
I had this little iPod. I used to sneak. I got it with me right now too. I still got these. I used to
Oh
sneak around with the
my
iPod
God.
Touch. I used to sneak around with the iPod Touch and download things off iTunes and stuff like that.
The sneaking around his parents like this is consistent with reactance theory, proposed by Jack Brem in 1966. When perceived behavioral freedom is restricted, individuals are motivated to reclaim it. In these situations, the forbidden fruit, which for David would have been music, becomes more desirable, and the individual tries to acquire it by any means, even if it includes secrecy. Now, it's not the behavior itself that's necessarily significant, but the pattern it establishes. That authority is to be managed through concealment rather than confronted directly. This pattern would then reoccur later for his adult life. It didn't help David that his private school life in New York also consisted of bullying and teachers picking on him, so he had an uneasy time both at school and at home.
I hated New York at that point.
I just want to go pause again real quick. With this type of video, I really want to make it clear that nobody is trying to justify what he's done. We're not trying to look and make excuses for what he's done. But again, I think it's very, very important when we have cases like this to understand what could have been prevented so that you can make those parallels in your lives and pay attention for signs that, may seem a little bit off. Because again, bro, from the outside looking in, there's literally no reason why we would think that David would do something like this. From the surface level, from his interviews, from the way he articulates himself. I mean, again, the music was depicting some dark and crazy stuff, but there's several artists that we can point at that are depicting some dark and crazy stuff. So, are they all murdering PDF files too? I would hope to think not. You know what I'm saying? So again, this is the overall goal with this video. I believe so. And that's definitely my overall goal with this video. By the time we get to the end of this, I guess we'll confirm if Jay Wisdom is also trying to achieve the same thing. But I'd imagine so.
Like,
Why did you
I didn't
hate
like
it?
my school. I was at a
'cause
private
you-
school, and they treated me so horribly, dude.
Why?
It was insane. I don't know. All the teachers had it out for me. My little brother could testify to that too. Dude, they just had it out for me all the time. I don't know what it was. I would just do nothing to nobody, and the teachers would just pick on me and bully me for no reason, bro. I wanted to leave that place so bad.
And he got his wish as they moved to Houston, Texas, and he found it slightly better at his new school. But he was a kid that didn't really seem to find anything that stuck.
I didn't
His
know
parents
David
tried to
was
get
in
him into
Houston.
music, but it wasn't stimulating enough for him at that time.
She put me into piano lessons when I was 7, and then I quit that after a week. She was like, okay, I'm not gonna pay for it if you don't like it. Quit that. She put me in a church choir when I was 8. Quit that. And then I was in middle school band. When I was in 7th grade, I played the flute, and I quit that.
But he never developed into a conventionally social child. He describes himself as a people watcher rather than a member of a friend group, sitting apart in cafeteria settings and constructing fictional narratives around classmates that they were unaware of.
At school, before I was homeschooled, like middle school, elementary, I would look at these kids, like at cafeteria, at lunch was like my playground, like my brain's playground. Like there's so many different kids and they're all doing something different. I would just sit there and I'm a people watcher. I would just inspect them and like write about them and stuff like that. And I kind of brought these characters to life that were inspired by my classmates. So every time I would write like a short story, I'd have these different classmates in these stories and they would never know. It's like different names and everything, but they were inspired by my classmates.
This preference to observe people and create these stories was an early marker that he had a natural tendency to see people as subjects for analysis rather than reciprocal social partners. Combined with his bullying in New York, it suggests he felt more inclined to exist on the edge of social bubbles rather than in them, present but not integrated, watching but not connecting. He says he began writing poetry in the 5th grade and pursued anime, gaming, and creative fiction from a young age.
Yeah, ever since I was young, I really just liked anime, gaming, and poetry. That's it. I remember reading my first manga when I was in 5th grade. Dragon Ball, Tokyo Ghoul, and see these fantasy characters with powers and all that. That weren't superheroes, and that inspired me to start writing and write my own stories about them.
But just in case his parents couldn't give him any more reason to resent them, they took him out of public school, the only place he was getting any sort of socialization, the place where he was letting his imagination run wild. and they instead placed him on an isolated homeschool curriculum.
Transitioning from public school to homeschool is tragic.
The first 2 years was tragic. Like,
Tragic.
I was asking to go back to school almost every day. My brother
I
too.
wonder why they
Was
did
the decision to move from public schooling to homeschooling a difficult one?
It was, and it wasn't mine, it was my parents.
So there's two different types of homeschooling in America. There's like group homeschooling, where it's parents that don't want their kids to be in public school environments.
I wonder why his parents did that. You know, to a degree, I almost feel bad for his parents, man. I'm sure they, you know, I would like to believe that they did not believe that they raised a murdering PDF file, bro. I'd imagine any parent of like a serial killer or something like that, they're probably thinking the same thing, like, how did it come to this? But then again, you watch videos like this, pretty much has no experience with social bubbles, so he didn't develop any social skills, always on his own, always making up his own stories within his brain and playing within his own fantasies. You know, again, I'm not looking to justify not a singular thing, but you can start to rationalize how somebody can just start to think this life is a game.
But they still want them to be in social groups, so they have like, you have homeschool kids that meet once a week at a specific place, and they play like extracurricular activities like basketball and stuff like that, so they can socialize, and they do the work on paper. And then there's a second homeschooling where it's just strictly on computer. That's what I did.
They didn't let him enroll on the socialized model involving group meetings with peers, but a fully computer-based, home-based program with no structured peer contact whatsoever. From a developmental psychology standpoint, this is the most significant single environmental factor in his profile. Erikson's 8th stage model identifies adolescents, approximately 12 to 18 years old, as the critical period for identity versus role confusion. The developmental task of forming a stable, coherent sense of self through peer interaction, social experimentation, group belonging, and the feedback of others.
That's so interesting to me because, again, I ain't no parent, and I know there isn't no rules to this parenting thing. You really can raise your kids however you like. But at the end of the day, I just feel like it is so important for children to develop their identities within social bubbles. And that's what school does. You know, I'm not advocating for anybody to get bullied. I'm not advocating for anybody to, you know, be in situations where they feel terrible. But at the same time, it's those situations that help shape us and help us understand what we like, what we don't like, the type of people we mesh well with, the type of people that we want to be around, the type of people we don't want to be around. Like when you're going through those phases and it's like awkward, you don't like it in the moment, but it's as you get older, you look back at those moments and you appreciate everything you went through.
Removing a child from that process during its peak window doesn't simply slow development, it redirects it, and they don't develop normally. And the main damage that came from that cutoff was socializing. None of his peers stayed in contact with him following the transition, and he was all alone.
I thought I had a lot of friends in middle school, and then after being homeschooled, nobody's hitting me up, nobody's asking me like, where am I at? Why am I not coming to school today? It made me question like, what is a real friend? And do I have any of those as well?
Especially when I was transitioning from public school to homeschooling and nobody like hit me up on Snapchat when I was like streaking everybody. My snap score was like 250,000, bro.
And nobody hits you back?
Nobody, dude.
What the
That's what I'm saying. Like nobody, like, who, you not at school? Where'd you go, Dave? Like nobody, like, dude, did I really have friends? And you start to question things.
Oh,
like,
totally.
About your everyday life. It's like, who's really there for you at the end?
I mean, dude, homeschooling really takes a toll on a kid. Like,
isolation.
Yeah, and there's outlets like, I know I made a couple friends now that were homeschooled, but they had like these groups that they would go to like bi-weekly and just to socialize, but I didn't have that. Like,
David would start to feel a growing disconnect between himself and his age mates, and an acute awareness of experiences that he was excluded from. I've gone through his TikTok, and this was clearly what hit him hardest. He was emotional seeing homeschool proposals. He has another post titled, What It Felt Like to Be a Homeschool Teen, and I won't play the audio for copyright reasons, but the lyrics go, everybody's falling in love and I'm falling behind, as he visibly shows his frustration at that fact. He missed out on having high school relationships, but had to watch everyone else get to have one through Snapchat. His former peers got to post relationship quotes and pictures with their partner, whilst he stayed at home, unable to do anything but watch. As the caption says, homeschool and being on social media 24/7 was not a good mix. In another post, he says his superpower is never being able to express my feelings properly because I was homeschooled and had no social life for 5 years. And on another, he says, I was homeschooled all my life. I never got to experience any school dances. When adolescents are denied normal
Bro,
peer
this is
social.
actually chilling as fuck when you're like looking at this, bro. This is super like, wow. Again, y'all, the reason we're watching this is truly so we can start spreading some level of awareness of, you know, how to pay attention for things, man, because sometimes people are screaming for help. Again, this isn't a justification for nothing. David's a monster at this point. But what can also be true is sometimes people don't start off as such. I'm not trying to, again, listen to what I say carefully. David's a monster at this point. But sometimes they don't start off as one, bro.
The need for connection and belonging doesn't disappear. It finds alternative channels. In David's case, that channel was the internet, specifically Fortnite, YouTube, Discord, TikTok, and eventually music. During his homeschooled years, David describes Fortnite as his primary social environment. He engaged in squad fills, which is where you're allowed to join games with strangers and talk to them if you have a headset and mic. And he allowed people to vent their personal problems to him.
Especially being homeschooled and not having a social life, right? So I'm on the game, I'm talking to all these random people, and they're talking to me about their life problems, you know, using video games to escape the real world as much as I am, and then living my life vicariously through them and like writing songs about their lives.
Yeah. I would go on Discord and I would go on Fortnite and I would go on like squad fills and I just let people talk to me and just tell me about their lives. Cause like most of these people that play video games the same way I do, they're going to it as an escape. So I was just being an open door and an open outlet for like these my peers and my friends to kind of just like vent to me about different things in their like personal lives and stuff like that.
And I'm like 15, 14 at this time, so I don't know how to like be a therapist, right? But it's like I'm taking this information and all these different people talking to me about different like problems and situations. I'm like, wow, this is really what humans are like. Like these are humans.
The fact he says, wow,
Crazy.
so this is what humans are like. These are humans.
He's already disassociating on, like, nigga, you're a human too.
Tells me that this was the only way David was understanding human psychology at that time. This is a clinically unusual developmental pathway. Normally, an adolescent's model of human behavior is built through direct, embodied, reciprocal experience, like friendship, conflict, romantic experience, loss, etc. But David built his model of human psychology through a parasocial and semi-anonymous listening role, absorbing other people's problems through a gaming headset. This produces a specific kind of social intelligence, highly observational, empathically competent on an intellectual level, but fundamentally disembodied. He understands humans like a researcher understands subjects, not as a participant understands his peers. And that's going to be significant when evaluating his later relational behavior. So he was chronically online, seemingly addicted to video games, but being home alone that much allowed him to stumble across much worse vices. Later, in his own Discord server, David...
That damn Discord, man. That damn Discord. Every fucking weirdo ever seems to be doing the deed on Discord.
disclosed a sustained
We need a damn put a investigation out on Discord at this point, bro.
pattern of consuming gore content beginning at approximately 14 years old, following the accidental exposure to a cartel execution video. Gore is real-world violence and injury, fully uncensored, including death and murder, and he was discovering that and watching it repeatedly at 14 years old. He describes a progression from initial shock response to habituation, saying, "It got to the point where I don't even cringe when I see it anymore," to then developing a dissociative response, claiming he started laughing at one point, but then escalated to deliberate intentional use. "I watch gore to disconnect the part of my brain that feels empathy to the wrong things."
There it is. There it is. He's fucking gone. Now he's gone.
We have something called
Hell
an amygdala,
no.
which generates the brain's threat and disgust
The
response.
fact that he was just saying these things openly at the time, this was probably before anything actually had happened, but he was like one of those kids that started, you know, playing with animals and ripping them apart and shit and just kind of disassociating.
to violence.
This was his
Repeated
version of
exposure to
that.
graphic stimuli triggers
Hell
habituation
no.
and desensitization. In simpler words, the threshold for what makes the brain want to cringe and look away rises because the stimulus is no longer threatening due to seeing it so much. What David describes in his Discord is consistent with this process in adolescence, whose
Or not. This date says 2023. Yeah, no, he might already been doing some stupid shit.
prefrontal regulatory systems are still maturing and therefore less equipped to contextualize and contain the desensitizing effect. But what distinguishes David's disclosure from typical adolescent experimentation is that last part. He doesn't describe watching gore for entertainment or shock value. He describes it as an emotional engineering exercise, a deliberate attempt to modify his own empathic response. This level of intentionality about emotional desensitization in a 14-year-old is far from typical and represents a significant clinical signal. This would have been a major warning sign and red flag that David was gaining the ability to care less about human life. During that same isolated period, David developed an elaborate alter ego he called Itami, a Japanese word meaning pain.
I have this alter ego named Itami, which means pain in Japanese, and I'm heavily inspired by like anime and stuff like that. But that character that's in the music videos I make now was actually an idea that I had years before music even started, when I was writing my first comic book. And it was this detective that would solve his own crime. So he was the good guy by day, and then at night he'd kind of transform into this alter ego and then commit crimes he'd solve the morning.
This is pissing me off, bro. This is genuinely pissing me off, because it's like, I don't want, because of how heinous David's crimes are and how like this nigga is literally making songs about the things that he did and you know the person he did it to, it makes it really hard to disconnect the art from the artist. You know, I usually and typically am the type of person that's like, hey man, we got to disconnect the art from the artist, because you know at that point, let's be honest, maybe not as heinous as this, but some of our favorite artists have done terrible things, you know. Again, maybe not as heinous as this, but whether it's sold drugs, robbing, killing, you know, goddamn, you know, crimes, real menaces to society. And it gets to the point where it's just like, if we pick and choose who we're gonna listen to just because of what they did, we probably would not have a lot of music, because a lot of these artists be doing some crazy stuff. But just like, here's another example of, if we're just talking about the artist and his creativity, is like, bro is creative, and this is like actually like, oh wow, this is like, he's breaking this down in different levels. Like, wow, this is actually a genuinely interesting idea content wise. But then you make that parallel of what he actually did. It's like, this nigga was really living this shit. So that's what makes his situation so scary. He's talking about the good guy by day, bad guy by night, you know, alter ego. It's the same person. It's like, nigga, this is him. This is what he did. He's over here laughing and smiling in the interview. Yeah, man, I'm this, I'm that, I'm so wonderful. And then by night, he's over here doing what he's doing, you know, chopping the body up with chainsaws and whatnot. Like, what the fuck? At that point, maybe I can't even give him that much credit for creativity. Nigga wasn't being creative. Nigga was just telling the truth. We just didn't believe him.
But Itami isn't this artistic, creative concept he's come up with. David described it in multiple interviews as a character he intended to develop into his own manga, one who was explicitly him, a detective who committed murders and then investigated them himself.
Big part of that manga was an evil version of me, an agent of chaos and kind of my alter ego, and there was an evil version of myself that would kind of come.
Yeah, this is fucking me up. I'm sorry, yo. I'm pausing so much. This is actually giving me chills, bro.
Out at random moments.
Nigga is literally telling us. He's telling us right here, right now. This is the game plan. This is what I'm gonna do. And we're just like, oh wow, yeah, very interesting. Okay. Very creative.
Kind of like Fight Club with Tyler Durden. And he would commit the crimes that I would have to solve as the detective. So like when I was as the detective, I'd be like solving murders that I'm committing myself.
Understand that there's a difference between normal fantasy and what David's doing. We all might fantasize here and there, maybe about obtaining a certain level of wealth or driving a certain car or whatever you guys care about. Escapist fantasy uses fictional scenarios to temporarily relieve stress and provide alternative experience. The psychological concept of fantasy elaboration, however, involves constructing increasingly detailed, immersive internal worlds in which the individual places themselves, not a character, but themselves, and which begin to function as a parallel framework for understanding identity and relationships. David explicitly inserted himself into this narrative. He is not the author of Itami. He's Itami's counterpart. they share an existence. He later described Itami as
The one that is weaving his way into my relationships and ruining them and inducing trauma and things like that.
This language suggests that the alter ego had become a psychological container for the parts of himself he wished to disown but had not eliminated.
What the fuck?
David
bro?
transitioned into music accidentally in late 2020.
I'm even starting to like feel uncomfortable from look at the person that's sitting here doing the interview
His way into my relationships and ruining them
and then look
inducing
at
trauma
the
and things like
person
that.
This language
that's
suggests
posed
that
up
the alter
here.
ego had
Again, normally you see an artist posed up in some, bloody clothes, distressed and all that. You just think he's modeling, he's posing. But I'm almost starting to feel like I'm looking at a demon here, bro. This guy looks really evil. This guy looks like the alter ego that he keeps talking about. Whoa.
become a psychological container for the parts of himself he wished to disown but had not eliminated.
Tell me I'm tripping. Y'all not feeling
David
that?
transitioned into music accidentally in late 2021 after copyright strikes on his gaming content prompted his mother to suggest he create original music.
I started making music in like December 2021. I used to be a Fortnite YouTuber, bro. Like, it's so crazy. Only reason I started making music is because my videos got copyrighted. Because I was using like Scissors music, Justin Bieber music, all that. And my mom was like, yo, if you're getting copyright strike, you're not making no money, make your own song. So I was like, bro, I could probably do that.
Because of his ability, I know he's able to play and do. So I said, just make your own music. And that was that.
So I kept doing it. And then it kind of just became this thing where the music was
bro.
getting more popular than the Fortnite videos. My SoundCloud numbers surpassed my Fortnite videos numbers. And it was out of here, bro.
He had no prior musical ambition. What he did have though was years of accumulated internal material, the Itami fantasy, the observational psychology built through online listening, the poetry he had written since 5th grade, and a set of emotional themes like isolation, romantic destruction, duality that had no other outlet. Music gave that internal world a public form. It also gave it a socially legitimate one. Dark themes that are wrapped in musical craft don't register to us listeners as warning signs. They register as artistry. The same content that might raise concern if it was in a journal or a private communication is celebrated when it has a compelling melody behind it. David's own statements confirm that his early music was not drawn from lived experience, but from imagination and preparation.
When I write music about heartbreak and the sad type of things, I write it not from experience because I was a really homebody. I was homeschooled. Like, I didn't have much of a social outlet like that. I write it in like preparation. I feel like when you commit to love, you commit to devastation as well.
I think it's a mixture of like trying to figure it out myself
See, kind of
and then looking at other people's experiences.
talking about love and the commitment for relationships in a twisted way as well, because he never got to experience it. He never really knew what it was like. So his fantasies and his imagination started to paint its own picture of what relationships were supposed to be. Again, no justifications because they're dark and twisted, but it's like I'm understanding what's going on.
I mean, 'cause I've never experienced like true heartbreak either. So I write all these songs in preparation for it. So I'm not devastated, So I know what to expect.
He describes writing about heartbreak in preparation, having never experienced it. He states directly, I love over-dramatized themes of romance because it would never be like this in real life.
I love over-dramatized themes of romance because it would never be like this in real life. So it allows you to like have more room to play around.
The thematic content of his early catalogue in 2022, like Bleed Out in March, Dirty Secrets in May, Romantic Homicide in July, centers on romantic destruction, hiding dark secrets, killing a romantic partner, and feeling no remorse. Romantic Homicide's central lyric, which David explains in detail in a Genius interview, is constructed specifically around the active first person. Not just you died, but I killed you. He stresses the first person agency.
Which was in the back of my mind, but then you think that I'm gonna say you died, but I say I killed you. So it's not like the thought of her is gone by itself was something that she did, it was something that I decided to do. And I killed her in the back of my mind.
He also describes the back of my mind as the location of this act, which is precisely where he has told us that his fantasy lives. His mother's reaction to Romantic Homicide is very ironic, but also significant.
I showed it to my mother, and she was like, that song's too violent and too sad. You're not releasing it. My son is not gonna be talking about killing people in music. And I was like, I'm gonna take that as a challenge, low key. I played it for her in the car, and she was like, David, this song is too violent. You're talking about killing people in your music? No, not my son. I was like, wait, I might be onto something, bro.
She identified something real in the content. He overrode her objection anyway and released it. And that song was the one that became his commercial breakthrough. The commercial success of Romantic Homicide is a pivotal moment in the psychology trajectory. David didn't receive any social correction for expressing violent romantic fantasy. He received validation, streams, a record deal with Interscope, and multi-million-dollar career momentum.
I get the first email from the labels. I showed them, I'm like, all right, my mom has to hear about this now. I was like, there's no way I can like sweep this under the rug. I'm getting really famous right now. And then I meet with Interscope, who I eventually signed with, and I meet on my team, Mogul Vision for management, that I signed on management. And then at that point, it was just time to push the button.
From a behavioral reinforcement standpoint, this is near optimal conditioning. The behavior, which was externalizing dark fantasy through art, produced the outcome most desired by someone with his developmental history, which was belonging, recognition, status, and the experience of being known without truly being seen. Because not only did he blow up in music, but that coincided with social media fame, like TikTok, where he got tons of engagement. But looking back on that, those fans were engaging with someone who wasn't even their true self, and who never took the mask off.
I got me as the artist, David, D4vd, Itami, which is the antagonist. He was the blindfold. My gaming character is coming soon. He is like...
He's really like putting his personalities in different categories and shit. What the fuck?
The one that's super tech savvy and stuff like that. And then my social media persona, which is also being built out as we speak. And that's the 4.
He constructed an entire identity architecture around himself with those 4 defined personas: David the artist, Itami the antagonist, a gaming persona, and a social media persona, none of which were David Anthony Burke. The actual self was not among them. What researchers describe as identity diffusion, where the boundary between constructed persona and authentic self becomes genuinely unclear, appears to be happening here. The masks were not overlaid on a stable self, they may have become the primary mode of self-experience. So David from early on learned how to switch between characters. In private, he could be this antisocial kid with dark fantasies. In interviews, he could sound smart and sophisticated. And on TikTok, he could do his best to be relatable and goofy to his audience. That ability to switch became something that we now potentially know might have helped him deal with the consequences of his future actions.
Holy shit, bro.
According to prosecution documents, David...
Shout out to Jay Wisdom, for real. This is a very, good video as far as the editing, the storytelling, the information, the research. Again, I leave the link to the original video in the description if you guys want to go check that out rather than, hearing my commentary. But I ain't gonna lie, I'm sitting back and kind of just taking it all in just like y'all right now. So, yeah. Just wanted to throw that out there, man.
David and Celeste Rivas Hernandez first made contact online in January 2022.
Okay, so that just confirmed what I was talking about, because the Discord messages we were looking at were from 2023. So my nigga was already digging in the bullshit.
When she was 11 years old and he was 16. This reportedly happened on Fortnite, which would be consistent with how David got his social interaction when he was homeschooled. The prosecution documents confirm a physical relationship began in November 2023 when Celeste was 13 and David was 18.
And that's where it's like, no matter what, this nigga was off the deep end at this point, bro. Fucking disgusting, because no 18-year-old is dealing with a 13-year-old. Like, that doesn't even make no sense. No 16-year-old is dealing with an 11-year-old. I don't give a fuck what's going on, like... That he was already completely like in the mode of he doesn't care anymore. Disgusting.
So they knew each other online for almost 2 years before ever becoming intimate. This is purely my opinion based on available context and evidence, but I don't believe David sought out Celeste in a predatory form, looking for a minor specifically because that's what physically attracted him. The fact he was only 16 at the time and was being homeschooled makes it completely plausible that the relationship began as some kind of intense online companionship.
Again, all possible, but just because we can rationalize and understand what happened doesn't make it right at all.
Where he was just happy to talk to someone, with age not being one of his concerns. I believe they started off as friends who confided in each other, made jokes, and wasn't started off in any inappropriate nature. What changed it is the question. The evidence that the prosecution are bringing forward documents a pattern that David was grooming Celeste in stages that got gradually more intense. The first thing he did was make her feel special. He released a romantic homicide music video on Celeste's birthday. He then recorded a song titled Celeste in December 2023, expressing deep personal obsession, and he continually maintained her presence in his Discord server. The song Celeste references the girl with my name tattooed on her chest, a detail that subsequently materialized in reality when Celeste had his name tattooed on her finger and shared it in the Discord server in July 2024. He also never publicly posted her on social media, but would post pictures where she's present but not identifiable,
Oh my God,
or captioning
bro.
posts referencing having a girlfriend to show his fans he was in a relationship, which gave his romantic music credibility. Another thing he did was use financial control. Prosecution documents confirmed that after Celeste's parents removed her phone from her in February 2024, David drove to Lake Elsinore where she lives and paid a classmate $1,000 to provide Celeste with a new phone he had purchased so that they could maintain contact. This was done after law enforcement had directly informed him that she was a 13-year-old runaway. Despite her parents and law enforcement
Bro, we done reacted to so many David videos. We have heard some of this information countless times, and I just can't. Every time I hear it, I'm just here shaking my head like, bro, I can't believe this nigga was moving like this. It's so crazy.
and to stop David from connecting with her, he chose to go around them anyway. He then isolated her from her family and support system. There's debate on whether Celeste had the best home life in the first place, but David definitely capitalized on that and took advantage of her vulnerability. Throughout 2024, the prosecution documents confirmed that Celeste spent significant time at David's Hollywood Hills residence, accompanied him to Las Vegas, London, and Texas, and was repeatedly reported missing by her family. This pattern of running away is consistent with successful grooming. The victim's primary attachment has been displaced towards the perpetrator. David had become the new safe place in her eyes, which is really sad to think about in hindsight. Another thing David desired was surveillance and control. It could be for humor purposes, so take it as context rather than fact, but in January 2024, after they'd started a physical relationship, he posted TikTok with the text on the screen implying a partner telling him that she will swallow an AirTag so he gets to know her every move. It seems playful on the surface, but with the context we have, he's describing a desire for a constant location surveillance over a minor. On January 11th, 2024, David did a Twitch stream, but he had Celeste in full view of his audience, right there in plain sight. She was wearing a hoodie and glasses to perhaps conceal suggestions at her age, and they seemed to be doing a cooking stream.
Season it? It's already seasoned, bro. It's Alfredo.
I'm yet to find the full stream, but something gets said beforehand, and the comments start saying things like, "Pray for his career, chat. You're done for, bro. Nah, you going on the Epstein list.
Oh,
There's no
shit.
escaping this, bro."
It's crazy, bro. Shit was right in our fucking faces, bruh.
Caught you in 4K. All messages that allude to the chat realizing that David is a allegedly. David reads these comments out aloud and questions Celeste. "Are we done?" To which Celeste says, "We need to delete this."
Pray for his career, chat. Are we done? Are we?
We need to delete this.
Are we? Maz, can we delete all VODs? And then as soon as the stream ends, delete the stream too?
What the oh my God.
Can we delete anything? You done for, bro? Y'all are not done? Now you going on Epstein? Yo, wait.
You see the instant panic in David because he's tried to keep this relationship a secret, and this was the closest he'd gotten to being exposed. The chat continues with David and Celeste Island trip and David Epstein flight list. But something else gets said, and David puts his hand firmly on Celeste's shoulder and says, "I media trained you." To which she replies, "No, you didn't."
Media
I personally don't.
Yo, I media trained you.
No, you didn't.
He says that's controversial, and she questions him with something that almost exposed his secret to the world.
That's controversial.
It's controversial of kids.
Really good.
Okay,
It's been a good one. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Mwah, 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 mwah,
Oh my
mwah. Oh my.
gosh.
Delete everything.
Holy shit, bro.
Delete everything. Everything goes.
She seemingly regrets saying it straight away, and David ends the stream. Of course, I have to preface that streaming clips get taken out of context all the time. What we don't know is what was actually said beforehand, and the chat could have been referencing something completely different. But what we do know is that David was making attempts to media train Celeste, in his own words. Due to him understanding what he was doing was wrong, this is an attempt at power control, because by giving her instructions on how to act, she's molded to become more obedient. It's crazy that this Twitch stream is almost a mirror of what the prosecution are alleging David did to Celeste over a year later. When he was on the verge of getting exposed, He tells his mods to delete everything, to physically discard of the evidence so that no one can find out the truth. He did what he needed to maintain control over the narrative, and panics when there's a risk of the mask slipping. Prosecution documents state that Celeste and David broke up in November 2024, though text messages.
Hearing them break up pisses me off. Like, they were never a real relationship, bro. I mean, again, I know what they're saying, but holy shit, it should have never even been a thing.
Messages confirm a continued contact through to at least March 2025. The documented text exchanges describe Celeste's growing distress at the nature of their relationship. She messaged, according to prosecution filings, "All we do is have sex and just hang out, man. I want more than that for myself." If you notice, the prosecution frames this as evidence of David's manipulation. This is because of the context that is supposedly surrounding this message. The prosecution's argument is that David had deliberately led her to believe that they had some sort of future together, that she was his girlfriend, his partner, someone he was building something with, specifically in order to maintain physical access to her and her silence. She was emotionally invested in a future I don't think he actually planned to give her. Now, before we proceed, I have to reiterate, because I know how soft the YouTube guidelines are when it comes to active cases and demonetization.
YouTube, come on, man. Disclaimers, analytical purposes only. We're just analyzing. We're not trying to promote or, you know what I'm saying, co-sign no bullshit. Human reviewers, come on. Stop it. None of that.
But David is only alleged to have murdered Celeste Hernandez and has pleaded not guilty. So take what I say next as opinion, as rumors, as theory, but not fact. Because his behavior over 2025...
Opinions and allegedly. Right.
If not guilty of the murder, just looks like normal behavior. But that's also the problem if he is guilty. Because only a psychopath could do what's been done to Celeste and go about life as normal. On the night of April 22nd, 2025, prosecution documents describe a lengthy argument conducted over text messages. Celeste had become aware of David's relationships with other women. Although they supposedly weren't in a relationship anymore, this triggered Celeste, and she threatened to expose their relationship publicly and destroy his music career. His debut studio album, Withered, was scheduled for release April 25th, 2025, so 3 days later. On top of that, he had a multi-million-dollar career, active endorsements, and a world tour booked. The prosecution alleges that at approximately 8:40 p.m. on April 23rd, 2025, David ordered an Uber to transport Celeste from her Lake Elsinore home to his Hollywood Hills residence. She arrived at approximately just after 10 p.m. The prosecution alleges that shortly after her arrival, David stabbed her multiple times and stood by while she bled out, making no attempt to call emergency services. At approximately 11:30 p.m., he drove north on the 101 freeway to Santa Barbara County, texting and calling Celeste's phone as he drove, a pattern the prosecution characterizes as a deliberate attempt at a cover story. He returned home early on April 24th, went to a radio interview for the album, and attended the album release party later that evening. The prosecution then documents evidence of David's poor attempt at concealing the crime and dismembering her body, which he then left in the front trunk of his Tesla.
Burke placed her body in the inflatable pool he'd ordered to prevent her blood from spilling onto his garage floor and used a chainsaw to cut off her limbs.
Surveillance footage confirms David drove his Tesla for the last time on July 29th, 2025, before parking it on Bluebird Avenue in Hollywood Hills and departing for his concert tour. And this is the alleged story we have so far on how David potentially murdered Celeste and then continued with life like nothing happened.
Crazy, bro. Insane.
The following analysis I'll give is based on if the evidence presented by the prosecution is factual and proven, and is just my opinion.
Disclaimer,
but the first thing that I believe to be true is that David demonstrates a dark triad personality. The dark triad is a mix of 3 personality constructs: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, identified in psychological literature as co-occurring and collectively associated with manipulative, exploitative, and callous interpersonal behavior. And I believe all 3 appear relevant to David's documented behavioral profile. Narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, is characterized by grandiosity, a persistent need for admiration, entitlement, and a lack of genuine empathy. Subclinical narcissistic traits, which don't meet the full diagnostic threshold but are clinically meaningful, are observable in David's behavior across multiple domains. The construction of an elaborate multi-persona identity architecture, the use of a child as a participant in his artistic and fantasy world, the apparent expectation that normal rules, including the laws, didn't apply to him, and the documented use of financial resources to purchase compliance from multiple parties like Celeste's classmates and potentially others, rather than just accepting social or legal constraints. He continued pursuit of Celeste after direct law enforcement contact, despite being explicitly told that she was a 13-year-old runaway, which just demonstrates how important he thought he was. Narcissistic individuals frequently exhibit a belief that ordinary legal and social constraints are obstacles that apply to others, but not them. Machiavellianism refers to a strategic, manipulative orientation towards interpersonal relationships. In simpler terms, using others as instruments towards personal goals, maintaining multiple social presentations simultaneously, and planning several steps ahead in your devious plans. David's documented behavior across the 2022 to 2025 period is consistent with this profile. The staged disclosure of his relationship that was sufficient to lend his music credibility, but not enough to expose it, the financial management of witnesses, the claimed media training of a minor to manage his public perception, and the fake name he used on the Amazon purchases when trying to cover his murder trail. Psychopathy is characterized by reduced fear response.
The other part about this, though, and we said this in my initial reaction when we started seeing, how he was ordering and going about stuff. David might have developed all this bullshit over a period of time of, the different personalities and being creative and good artists, but he also was just fucking stupid. Let's not forget that, because bro was ordering chainsaws and shit to his house and thought, oh, if I just change the name to Victoria, yeah, that's definitely going to throw off the police. I mean, bro, again, we're not co-signing nothing, but I'd like to think a psychopathic murderer would go through a lot more, of a diligent plan of how to, do some shit. But again, are we mad that he's this dumb? It helped him get caught, so it is what it is. But holy shit, like, sometimes the truth, what happens in reality, is so much weirder than what happens in fiction.
Diminished empathy, shallow affect, and the capacity to engage in harmful behavior without the guilt and anxiety that normally regulates such behavior in normal individuals. What's actually happening in the brain is reduced amygdala reactivity, meaning the internal alarm system that makes violence psychologically hard to deal with is significantly reduced. David's deliberate desensitization program beginning at 14, his awareness of this process, saying, I watch gore to desensitize the part of my brain that feels empathy to the wrong things, and his ability, if the allegations are accurate, to attend a radio interview and album release party within hours of the alleged murder, are all consistent with elevated psychopathic traits. The prosecution's timeline describes someone who moved through the alleged crime and its immediate aftermath in a goal-directed, organized manner without visible emotional disruption to his public functioning. He saw the murder and the cleanup as a task to get out the way, rather than a major disturbance to his life. It's important to note that psychopathy exists on a continuum. High psychopathic traits do not predict violence on their own. They represent a reduction in the internal constraints that make violence improbable for most people. You can definitely have psychopathic traits and go through life without killing anyone. But if you had to, or if you believed you had to, it wouldn't be hard for you to mentally process.
I mean, that's important though, because again, I think we were reacting to another video, and you might have seen, I think a lot of people reacted to it, where it's talking about the psychology of psychopaths out there. And it was a woman kind of just breaking down. She's clinically proven to be a psychopath. She knows she's a psychopath, but she hasn't done anything. And it's kind of like a true psychopath, at least a smart one, and one that, understands that there's consequences for your actions. Just because you think something doesn't mean you act on those thoughts. And it's kind of like at that point, you dive a little deeper. It's like, where does the empathy measure lie? Like, do you care? Do the things that you think affect you negatively? And I think that's where it's like, okay, you may be a psychopath, but then, it doesn't mean just because you're a psychopath doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be an evil person that commits evil crimes. So it's a very interesting conversation, man, because again, when you have empathy and when you understand right from wrong, it's not that psychopaths don't understand right from wrong. They just don't empathize with it. They don't necessarily care.
The best way I see fit to analyzing the rest of his psychology is by answering some common questions surrounding the case. The first is, was David born with psychopathic traits, or did the environment shape him like this?
Yeah,
The evidence
that's what I
doesn't
talked
support
about
a simple
early on
nature
in the
or
video.
nurture answer, and the research literature on psychopathy doesn't even need one. Studies on antisocial personality disorder, which is the more official diagnosis with traits similar to psychopathy, have found that genetic predisposition is a real factor, but it's not determinative, meaning genes do play some part, but it needs more than that. What the developmental history suggests is that David likely had some dispositional features like his elevated sensation seeking, a reduced fear response, a natural tendency towards social observation over social participation that interacted with a profoundly adverse developmental environment. The isolation he experienced in homeschooling removed the social components that normally regulate and redirect dark impulses in adolescence, such as peer feedback, mentorship, romantic experience within age-appropriate contexts, and the reality testing that comes from genuine reciprocal relationships. Basically, when you're in school and you're weird, people are going to tell you you're weird and they're not going to be friends with you, and that's going to cause you to not be weird. The gore consumption, the fantasy elaboration, and the emotional desensitization program didn't occur despite his isolation. They occurred, most likely, because of it. Any genetic psychopathy predisposition might have stayed more muted in a more socially connected environment, but David was given 5 years of uninterrupted space in which to develop it without correction. The next question is, if many children experience homeschooling, many children watch gore, and many children watch anime, and they don't become violent, then why was David different? The answer is not any single factor, but the specific combination and timing of factors, and the absence of mitigating ones. 3 elements distinguish David's profile from the general population of adolescents who share some of his experiences. First, the duration and completeness of his social isolation was extreme. Not partial homeschooling with peer contact, but 5 years of near total isolation during the precise developmental window where identity and empathy are formed through reciprocal relationship.
And this goes into another conversation, which, again, when we're on the conversation of David, it's like, all right, he's a murderer, he's done disgusting things. Yes. But just in general, y'all, we are not, as human beings, we are not born to just be these antisocial creatures. Like, it is so important for you guys to get up out of your house, bro. Go make friends, go make relationships, go get your heart broken, go get disappointed, understand how to navigate and regulate your own emotions and feelings in the real world, bro. Because again, I'm not putting that on nobody. Just because you a lonely fuck doesn't mean you're gonna turn into this, but it does shape how you interact with people and just the social cues of life of how to move. So like, it's so important as you get older and older to make sure you're putting yourself out there, and don't just continue to isolate yourself, because I promise you there's a group of people out there that you can mesh well with and have peers with. So if this is you, or when I say this is you, I'm not talking about David, but if you're somebody that feels like you're alone and you don't have any friends and again, in David's situation, his parents didn't allow him to go to school. I understand that's tough, but try your best, man. If you need to go join the goddamn chess club, do it. We need to be, we're social creatures. We were never meant to just be locked up in a room all day and not have interactions with nobody.
Fair enough if they let him go to some sports clubs and he got to meet people weekly, but he was completely alone. Second, his response to that isolation was not passive, but active, as he built an increasingly elaborate internal fantasy world in which violent romantic narratives were central, and he deliberately used that period to pursue desensitization by watching gore videos. Third, and perhaps most critically, nothing corrected the trajectory. There were no peer relationships to provide reality feedback. There were no teachers or mentors who intervened. When his dark material reached the public, it was celebrated. When law enforcement contacted him directly about a 13-year-old runaway, he found a way around their intervention. The system of natural corrections that normally checks and redirects deviant development failed at every point. Another question is, with his fantasies and music content, did David always have a lust for murder, or did circumstance just cause him to kill in that moment? Neither characterization is fully accurate. Despite how wild our minds like to run with conspiracy, evidence doesn't support a long-term conscious plan to murder Celeste. There's no indication he groomed her with killing in mind from the outset. What the evidence does support is a sustained internal world in which romantic relationships and fatal violence were thematically intertwined, in which he had deliberately engineered his own emotional desensitization to that violence, and in which he had repeatedly rehearsed, Through his music videos, through lyrics, fantasy, and alter ego construction, the psychological experience of killing a partner and feeling nothing. Whether or not he consciously intended to kill Celeste, he had spent years building the psychological infrastructure that made it executable. The prosecution's alleged motive that he was silencing a threat to his career is entirely plausible as a proximate trigger, but the proximate trigger ignited something that had been laid down over a long period of time. A person without that psychological infrastructure, confronted with the same threat, would not have had the same response. They might have offered to talk about things, maybe to pay her off, or something, but not murder. A very common question is, why did he leave the body in his Tesla and then just go on tour? Was it narcissistic overconfidence or something else? There's the theory that he wanted the body to be found so that everyone could appreciate the art of his crime, and whilst psychologically intriguing, it doesn't hold up well against the broader evidence. The prosecution documents a person who used a false name to purchase disposable equipment, drove to Santa Barbara County to destroy evidence the night of the alleged murder, made deliberate false statements to law enforcement, and continued attempting to incinerate evidence months later, as he bought a burn cage in July that he didn't end up using. This is not the behavior of someone wanting the body to be discovered. It's the behavior of someone who believed he was managing the situation competently. The most clinically consistent explanation is indeed narcissistic overconfidence, a well-documented feature of individuals who combine high narcissistic and psychopathic traits. The belief isn't simply "I am above the law" in an abstract sense. It's the belief that the individual's intelligence, status, and resources are sufficient to manage any problem. Leaving the car on the street rather than disposing of it properly is a catastrophic risk assessment failure, but it's consistent with the same cognitive.
Shit was fucking stupid. But again, I digress. I don't even want to say I'm glad I did it, because obviously I just wish there was no life lost in this situation. But, you know, he got caught.
Pattern that led him to go to his radio interview the morning after the alleged murder.
Crazy.
The operational logic appears to have been, the car is not at my address, it's a few hundred feet away, I'm about to leave on tour, and this is manageable. He definitely thought that Celeste running away all the time was going to play to his advantage, as no one would be looking for her. But when it comes to dead bodies decomposing, you don't look for that smell. The smell finds you.
Fact.
The question most fascinating to me, especially when watching through all of his TikTok videos following the proposed date of the alleged murder, is what allowed him to continue functioning normally after the fact. Several interacting psychological mechanisms are relevant here. The first is the reduced guilt and anxiety response associated with elevated psychopathic traits. The internal system that makes violent acts psychologically disabling for most people was, in David's case, already significantly reduced through years of deliberate desensitization. The second is compartmentalization, a defense mechanism in which an individual maintains separate psychological areas that don't interact, allowing normal social functioning to continue in one area while extreme events are contained in another. The third is the role of his persona architecture. David had spent years living between constructed identities, none of which were his actual self. Switching to David the artist for a radio interview was not a performance grafted onto a traumatized person. It was, by that point, his default public mode of existence. He was the psychopathic and cold version of himself that night, and switched his persona to David the artist by the following morning. Finally, if the prosecution's characterization of the alleged murder as an act to silence Celeste is accurate, then there was no emotional conflict to suppress. The act achieved its objective. The threat was eliminated. For someone with the psychological profile described in this video, David saw this more as completing a task rather than being horrified at what he'd done. So it wasn't that deep to him, and that's why there were no signs, at least publicly, of breakdown or panic. Now the final two are significantly important to many of you watching. Firstly, was David an actual pedo that would have pursued other underage girls, or was Celeste's age just incidental to timing? The evidence doesn't actually support primary pedophilic orientation as the dominant motivation, as I addressed earlier. However, the pattern of seeking a relationship with someone significantly younger, from an unstable home, and therefore highly susceptible to the power dynamic he preferred, is unlikely to be entirely incidental.
I mean, that's what predators do. I mean, we can talk about the age or just the circumstance, but what does a predator do in the most basic way, shape, or form? They try to take advantage of something or somebody that they know is less likely to cause harm to their mission statement. It's a predator. You know, if we take the predator off the PDF situation and just go straight to the wild of what predators do, they prey on the weak.
The specific age of Celeste, 11 at first contact, 13 at the alleged start of the physical relationship, may reflect opportunity and controllability rather than exclusive attraction to that age group. whether he would have sought out other minors depends significantly on whether the control and power dynamic, rather than the age itself, was the primary draw. The evidence leans towards him just preferring the...
Yeah, I don't really care too much for that. Again, not to say that I don't care about the age, but predator's a predator, bro. A predator's a predator. We can point at the age, or we can point at the circumstance. And you're preying on the weak, the less inclined to challenge your way of thinking. That's what you're doing.
Control aspect, which suggests that his targets might have included adult women in vulnerable circumstances just as much as minors specifically. In simple terms, I don't believe he cares if it's an adult or a minor, just so as long as he can control them. And the final question, if not caught for this alleged murder, would David have killed again? On the available evidence, a second murder was not inevitable, but the risk profile wasn't low. The alleged murder, if accurately characterized by the prosecution, was carried out to eliminate a specific threat to a specific goal, which was protecting his career. This is different from the profile of a serial killer driven by compulsion or escalating fantasy fulfillment, like Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, and the BTK killer. However, the post-alleged murder behavior described in prosecution documents, the methodical dismemberment, the ongoing attempts to destroy evidence, the continued public functioning, is consistent with someone who didn't experience sufficient psychological cost from the act to be deterred from repeating it under some...
So I feel like, yeah, what we get from this is maybe he wouldn't have gone out allegedly just knocking people off left and right. But if he felt like you were a threat and he felt like you were going to cause him an issue, yeah, he'd probably try to get you knocked off.
The circumstances.
And lose no fucking sleep over it.
If the career threat had risen again with another person in a position to expose damaging information, the psychological barriers to a similar response would have been lower the second time, not higher. Basically, if the same situation repeated itself with another girl like Celeste, David would just say, "It worked the first time, so I'll do it again." But I don't believe he'd go around his life trying to find people to murder. So, how do we summarize? David Anthony Burke's trajectory is not the product of a single cause, and it doesn't follow the profile of someone who is always going to commit a violent crime. It follows the profile of someone whose dispositional characteristics were given an extreme developmental environment in which those characteristics were amplified, reinforced, and never corrected. The homeschooling decision at 13 was the rupture, not because it was inherently abusive, because it removed the entire social archetype.
Which again, you know, I feel bad for the parents in the sense, like, I don't know what the parenting situation was, but I want to believe that this wasn't the child that they raised. This wasn't the child that they were, you know, hoping to push into the world and promote to do, you know, these things. So I give them the benefit of the doubt that I'm sure they just wanted what's best for David, you know, even if it was wrong. And that's the crazy thing about parenting, man. There's no rules to this shit. I don't know what their situation was. I don't know why they thought pulling him out of school and all that stuff was the right thing to do for his upbringing. But again, from my POV, I'm not a psychologist, so this isn't advice, but kids need to socialize, man. Again, and if they don't, I'm not saying they're going to turn into this, but, you know, you definitely hinder their social skills significantly.
Within which deviant development is normally detected and corrected, and replaced it with 5 years of unstructured internet access and internal elaboration. The resulting internal world, saturated with violent romantic fantasy, deliberately desensitized emotions, and a constructed alter ego who committed murders, was then given a commercial platform that celebrated rather than challenged it. The relationship with Celeste Rivas Hernandez was built on the structural conditions his isolation had created, an online social infrastructure that gave him access to vulnerable people, a power dynamic he had never experienced in any other relational context, and a fantasy framework that had always positioned a romantic partner as someone he would end up killing. What the prosecution alleges is that when that relationship produced a threat to his survival, both professionally and financially, the psychological infrastructure necessary to respond violently was formed, and the psychological barriers that would have made most people unable to act on that response weren't. Celeste Rivas Hernandez was 14 years old. She was reported missing by her family multiple times. She had reached out to the one adult who was supposed to care for her and was told that she was wanted, loved, and seen, or at least made to feel that way at one point in their relationship. The prosecution alleges that that same person who told her those things ordered the Uber that brought her to his door and stood by as she bled out on the floor of his Hollywood Hills home. The warning signs were there, in his music, in his Discord, in his fantasy constructs, in his own words, in interviews. given freely to journalists who heard them as art. The question this case raises, for parents, for platforms, for the music industry, and for the audiences who stream artists without reading what they're actually saying, is not why nobody saw it. It's why, when it was visible, it was so easy to look away.
Whoa, man. W video. Y'all let me know what y'all think about this one in the comments section. Again, none of this is to glorify, none of this is to excuse the disgusting things that David has done. In my personal opinion, I think he is 100% guilty of these crimes. And justice for Celeste, RIP Celeste. And, you know, we're going to continue to see how the case plays out. But I do think, again, when you sit back and learn from people's mistakes and kind of see what, you know, the mind frame or where the problems might have started, it gives us in our lives to make sure that we are paying attention to the signs and, you know, trying to prevent things like this happening to anybody else. So, love y'all, appreciate y'all. Where you at, family? I'll see you on the next one. My name's Berto. Where you at, Berto?
Where you at, Berto?